Have you ever heard of foreign accent syndrome? It's one of the rarest neurological disorders. This peculiar condition often stems from a brain injury, perhaps from an unfortunate accident or a stroke. And it's not just a quirky name, it genuinely makes people speak their native language as if they've suddenly acquired a foreign accent. Imagine being born and raised in New York, but after a bump on the head, you start speaking English with a French accent. Sounds like a plot for a comedy movie, right? But it's a very real and often disorientating condition for those who experience it. This syndrome doesn't change what people say, but how they say it. And it's not as simple as swapping one accent for another. It's a complex blend of changes in pitch, pronunciation, and pattern of stress. Imagine one day, you wake up and you're speaking with an accent completely foreign to you. That's the reality for those with foreign accent syndrome. Moving on, we have Hikikomori. This is a psychological and social phenomena originally from Japan. Picture a life lived entirely within four walls, with the outside world kept at bay. This is the reality for individuals grappling with Hikikomori. It's an intense form of self-isolation, where a person withdraws from society, often staying within their rooms for months, even years on end. They avoid contact with others, preferring solitude over social interaction. Initially, Hikikomori was thought to be exclusive to Japan. However, we've come to realize that it has crossed the borders, spreading its reach to the West. It's not a phenomenon tied to a particular culture or society. Instead, it's a human response to various pressures, stresses, and anxieties. The world, with its expectations, rules, and relentless pace, can be overwhelming for people with Hikikomori, forcing them into isolation. It's a complex issue that requires understanding, compassion, and comprehensive support to overcome. Next on our list is Diogenes Syndrome. This intriguing disorder is best known for its hallmark symptom, extreme hoarding. People with Diogenes syndrome amass a staggering amount of possessions and refuse to part with them, leading to a home environment that's often cluttered and unhygienic. But it's not just about the clutter. This syndrome can also lead to social isolation, as the individual's living conditions can be off-putting to others. Beyond the physical clutter, there's also a profound impact on the person's overall well-being. The accumulation of waste and discarded items can lead to serious hygiene issues and, in extreme cases, even nutritional problems, as the individual may neglect proper food preparation and consumption in the midst of their disorder. Life with Diogenes syndrome is not just about living amidst a sea of possessions. It's a life filled with clutter and isolation, a constant battle against the urge to collect and the challenges that come with it. You may have heard of our next disorder, Tourette Syndrome. Named after Georges Gilles de la Tourette, this syndrome is one of the more noticeable neurological disorders. It's characterized by involuntary movements and sounds, known as tics. Individuals with Tourette's don't have control over these tics, which can range from simple like blinking or throat clearing, to complex like touching objects or repeating words. While it might seem like these tics serve a purpose, they're actually unplanned and without specific intent. Tourette syndrome often begins in childhood, and while its severity can fluctuate over time, it is a lifelong condition. Despite common misconceptions, not all individuals with Tourette's involuntarily swear or use inappropriate language, a symptom known as coprolalia. This, in fact, is quite rare. Living with Tourette syndrome means navigating a world full of unexpected movements and sounds. Yet individuals with this disorder lead rich, fulfilling lives, demonstrating resilience in the face of challenge. Life with Tourette syndrome is full of unexpected movements and sounds. Next, we delve into the strange world of Stockholm Syndrome. This peculiar disorder often unfurls in the aftermath of a kidnapping. The victims, in an unexpected twist of emotions, develop a positive bond with their captors. It's an emotional shift that leaves many scratching their heads, questioning how one can sympathize with those who have caused them harm. You see, Stockholm Syndrome isn't simply about forming an attachment. It's more complex, more intricate. Some theorists suggest it's a survival strategy, a defense mechanism triggered by the trauma of the situation. The victim, in a desperate bid to survive, might subconsciously try to empathize with their captor, to understand them, to see the world through their eyes. It's a psychological adaptation, an attempt to find safety in an unsafe situation. It's a paradoxical situation for those suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, feeling empathy for their captors. We now turn our attention to Taijin Kyofusho syndrome, a social anxiety disorder. This is a condition that is most commonly observed in Japan. The distinct characteristic of this disorder is an intense fear that one's body, its parts, or its functions could be seen as offensive or embarrassing to others. It's a fascinating twist on the concept of social anxiety. Now you might be thinking, isn't that just social phobia? Well, not quite. While social phobia is centered around the fear of self-embarrassment in social situations, Taijin Kyofusho syndrome takes it a step further. Individuals with this disorder aren't just worried about embarrassing themselves, they fear causing discomfort or embarrassment to others simply by their presence or appearance. So, it's a unique form of social anxiety, where the concern is less about how the individual feels about themselves and more about how they believe others perceive them. With Taijin Kyofusho, it's not about how they feel, but how they think others feel about them. Moving on, we encounter erotomania. This condition is a fascinating psychological disorder that's relatively rare. It's characterized by the delusion that someone else, usually of a higher social status or a celebrity figure, is deeply in love with the individual suffering from this disorder. The person with erotomania is convinced of this love, despite having no concrete evidence or personal connection to the object of their affection. This delusion can be so strong that they misinterpret neutral actions as signs of this imagined romantic interest. They might even go to extreme lengths to contact or communicate with the person they believe is in love with them, leading to uncomfortable and often distressing situations. Imagine being convinced that a movie star or a royal figure is secretly smitten with you. It's a disorder that blurs the line between admiration and obsession, making it a truly peculiar phenomenon. Unrequited love takes a strange turn with erotomania. Lastly, we look at omphalophobia, the irrational fear of navels. This intriguing phobia manifests in an individual's extreme discomfort with the sight or touch of their own or others' belly buttons. It's not just a case of mild squeamishness, but a full-blown phobia with physical and emotional symptoms. Those with omphalophobia may experience irritability, nausea, and even dizziness when confronted with a navel. These symptoms are accompanied by a feeling of intense fury or anger, often directed at themselves for their inability to overcome the fear. The most debilitating symptom, however, may be the overwhelming feeling of helplessness. Imagine the daily struggle of those with omphalophobia. Simple, everyday tasks like bathing or changing clothes can become an ordeal, as they require the exposure of the navel. This phobia, like many others, can significantly impact a person's quality of life. For those with omphalophobia, even the sight of a navel can trigger intense fear. We've journeyed through some of the strangest disorders known to psychology. We started with foreign accent syndrome, a perplexing condition where people, usually after a brain injury, begin to speak their native language with a foreign accent. It's a rare reminder of how intricately our brains are wired for speech and how easily that wiring can be disrupted. Then we delved into Hikikomori, a psychopathological and sociological phenomenon primarily seen in Japan. It involves individuals isolating themselves from society to an extreme degree, a stark example of how societal pressures can impact mental health. We also explored Diogenes Syndrome, a disorder characterized by the inability to discard possessions, even to the point of living in squalor. It's a stark reminder of the power our belongings can hold over us. Tourette Syndrome, a neurological disorder marked by involuntary movements and sounds, shows us how the brain's control over our bodies can sometimes go awry. Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where kidnapping victims develop emotional bonds with their captors, highlights how our minds can adapt and cope in the most extreme and distressing circumstances. We discussed Taijin Kyofusho syndrome, a social anxiety disorder common in Japan, where individuals fear their presence or appearance is offensive to others. It's a fascinating look at how different cultures can shape our fears and anxieties. Erotomania, a mental disorder where the individual believes a higher status person, often a celebrity, is in love with them, demonstrates the power of delusion and the human need for connection and recognition. Finally, we touched on omphalophobia, the irrational fear of navels. It's one of the rarest phobias, yet it illustrates our brain's capability to develop fears about seemingly harmless things. Each of these disorders, while strange and rare, show us the vast complexities and mysteries of the human mind. We've only just scratched the surface of understanding these conditions, but each one offers a unique window into the human psyche. They remind us that the human experience is varied, complex, and at times truly bewildering.